there is no water crisis in South Africa, just a crisis or just a crisis of water management. I think I have that right. Now, this is the view of former Water Affairs Director General, Professor Mike Muller, as the issue of water is in the spotlight ahead of the local government elections. Now, most provinces are experiencing water shortages, and some residents have threatened not to vote if this issue persists. Professor Mike Muller joins us now via the virtual platform to talk to us about the issue of the water crisis in the country. Prof, I know exactly your view. You're saying the country, in most parts, does not have a shortage of water, which would constitute a crisis. The only crisis there is that there is a lack of management of our water resources. Explain to us first what meaning you attach to this issue becoming an election issue going into these local elections.
Fine, thanks. Thanks for having me. Yes, you know, even if we look at a metro like Gqeberha, which has been going into a major crisis. We're in day zero. We must reduce to 50 litres, a bit like Cape Town went a couple of years ago. If you look at what has been happening there, you'll find that 10 years ago, the municipality decided they needed to increase the storage of water and bring more water into the city. They decided how to do it. But then for 10 years, they did nothing. And then there's a water shortage. So, you know, there is plenty of water in that region that comes from the Orange River. They have a big tunnel built during apartheid for various reasons, but it's there and it can be used and there's water in it. But that water has to be taken to the city. And they've delayed doing that for 10 years. So there's an example for you, Collie, of how we have the water in the rivers, we have the water in the dams, but somehow it doesn't seem to be getting to people's taps. And I'd like us to think much more about why doesn't it get to the taps? Because otherwise what we'll hear is, oh, there's a drought. Droughts happen all the time. Oh, it's climate change. I can assure you that the impacts of climate change are not responsible for water shortages. So we really do need to focus on what the issues are. And yes, as you say, lots of people are worried about it because if you look at the stats, it's terrible. The rural provinces like Limpopo and Mpumalanga and Northwest, more than half the people who were questioned, and this is by Stats SA, this is not made up statistics, more than half the people said that their water supplies were regularly interrupted for, you know, over a month at times. Now, of course, if a politician goes and says, vote for me, people will say, I'll vote for you, but you tell me how you're going to make sure that there's water in my tap in the morning.
Prof, I'm sure you will be aware of the Giyani water project. I simply could not believe the explanation from nearby residents, or should I say communities, that were saying we are next to this water source and there's a very large dam that was nearly full to capacity at that time. It was 2016. And they said the only problem here is that we need pipes that are going to connect to that water source so that we're able to get water in our front yards. Now, this is 3 billion rand down the line. How are residents supposed to have faith in a government that does that to them?
You know, Giyani, I'm afraid, is one of the sort of terrible examples of what happens when you allow politics to get out of control and you push the managers to one side. So let me remember my old colleague Alson Matukani, who's late recently, 2 weeks before he died, this year still. He phoned me up and he said, Mike, what is going on with this water project? I have people coming to my house because I've got a borehole, but everyone from this whole town is coming to my house. Why haven't we finished the project? Now, Engineer Alson Matukani was the regional director of water in Limpopo province. And he'd been pushed to one side. He didn't know what was happening there. He had retired. He was trying to have a quiet life, but people were still blaming him. we know that a succession of, let's be clear, crooked contracts were entered into by the Mopani municipality. They were thrown out by court. The department was told to go out to tender again. Minister Giyani decided to ignore what the court said. Her Director General allowed that at the time. They just gave the project to Lepelle Water. They told Lepelle which contractor to appoint. You know, it went on and on of doing all the things that you're not supposed to do, and it was just allowed to happen. And every time something changed, money was lost. So the wrong pipes were bought in the first case. Some pipes were installed, but it was turned out that the contractor wasn't legally appointed, so they had to stop because they couldn't pay them. And you just had this ongoing crisis and waste of public money. But at the end of it, in Giyani, my colleague Alson Machukani was being hammered by his neighbors saying, so why is the water not here? And all he could do was say, well, come, you can fill your containers here at my borehole because I'm in the same position as you. Now that's shocking, because there was an engineer with 40 years experience who'd been pushed to one side, and people who really didn't know what they were doing gave contracts, took money because they wanted to do things in a different manner. We can't run the country like that.
Prof, here's a question that you're most likely going to perhaps I don't know, but I'm looking for your suggestions here. You mentioned the name, former Minister Nomvula Mokonyane. She was the first minister to run that department because it was a new department, water and sanitation. When her term came to an end, that department was said to be, or to have been nearly bankrupted if it actually wasn't broke. And the question is, why haven't we seen criminal charges brought against either the officials who were clearly the heads within that department, because this Giyani water project was part and parcel of that looting that went on?
Yeah, look, you know, it becomes very complicated to try and understand what happens, and that's why I actually went up to Giyani before my colleague's passing, just to try and understand myself a little of what had happened, because, you know, this is something we're all talking about. So let me correct you on a couple of issues, though. First of all, Nomvula Mokonyane didn't have a new department. It was decided to change the name of what was the Department of Water Affairs to Department of Water and Sanitation, because there had been a silly move to take sanitation out for a few years. It hadn't worked. It was just put back in. And people thought, and this is not a bad thing, they thought we should remind ourselves that water services are water supply and sanitation. So we shouldn't think there was a new department. She took over an existing department which was properly structured, had lots of resources and lots of people who knew what they were doing. But when you start trying to understand what went wrong and why charges haven't been brought, you have to ask the question, well, the money that was given to Mopani through the department was misspent and the court stopped it. Whose fault was that? Should the department have done that, or should the Mopani people be responsible? And then the court said to the department, put this project on tender so that it can be properly awarded and properly supervised and done. Now, the minister and her DG, Margaret Ann Diedrichs, decided, no, they were going to give this project to Lepelle Water Board, which is one of their agencies, but instead of telling them to go to tender, they simply instructed them which contractor to appoint. Now, Lepelle should have actually said, sorry, Minister, we've read